There are more and more people in the world, yet we are more isolated than ever. Today on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, we're talking about creating connection. Right here on episode number 133. Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We're here today with Dan Schawbel. We're going to introduce him to you, and you're going to be excited to have the chance to meet him. So let's get started. Dan is a New York Times bestselling author a couple of times, a partner and research director at Future Workplace, and the founder of both Millennial Branding and WorkplaceTrends.com. He has written the best-selling career books Promote Yourself and Me 2.0. His latest book is called Back to Human: How Great Leaders Create Connection in the age of isolation. Here it is. We're going to talk about that today. Through his companies, he's conducted dozens of research studies and worked with major brands, including American Express, GE, Microsoft, Virgin, IBM, Coca-Cola, and Oracle. He's written countless articles for Forbes, Fortune, Time, The Economist, and the Harvard Business Review. He's been profiled or quoted in more than 2,000 media outlets, including a ton of places that you've heard before, like Today's Show, Fox News, Fox and Friends, and lots more. The Steve Harvey Show, even. He has been recognized on several lists, including Inc. Magazine's 30 Under 30, Forbes Magazine's 30 Under 30, Business Insider's 40 Under 40. You're clearly getting older, Dan. And 20 entrepreneurs you should follow, as well as Workforce Magazine's Game Changers. Dan, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
It is a pleasure. And we are going to talk about this brand new book. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about the journey, how you got, just give us the quick overview of how you got where you are, sort of what led you to where you're at today.
Yep. First job when I was 13, I was a caterer at my temple. First internship in high school, 7 more internships in college, 7 leadership positions in on-campus organizations. Started my first business sophomore year of college doing website design. Then I spent 3.5 years at a company called EMC Corporation, which is acquired by Dell, but Fortune 200 company. I created the first ever social media position there. And I did that because outside of work, starting in October 2006, I started a blog called Personal Branding Blog. And I was writing 12 times a week. This was early in the blogging days. So I started with 0 readers, 0 comments, 0 traffic, 0 everything. And I just knew that personal branding, especially using social media, was going to be important. I felt it. I felt like I was the right person because when I was getting internships and getting jobs, like I had a CD portfolio of work that was custom for the position. I had a resume, I had a business card, I had my own website. I was doing everything that I've always talked about, and it was working very well for me. So I viewed myself as a case study. And then it wasn't until 6 months after that Fast Company magazine profiled me. It was a week after they profiled Tim Ferriss, author of the 4-Hour Work Week. And I had no idea the impact that would have. I assumed that press was important, but I didn't know that it could really have a huge impact in your life. So I was invited to speak as a 23-year-old at Google's headquarters. I actually turned it down because I didn't feel mentally ready for it. And then I got it.
It's okay. Let's stop right there. So do you regret that, or was that a good decision?
So what ended up happening, the person who invited me got really upset. She'll never talk to me again. But I don't regret it because I just was not mentally ready. I had just been speaking to a few colleges. I didn't want to bomb a big, moment at Google. I eventually spoke it there through another connection, but right. Everything has to happen organic to me. Like I don't plan things out 20 years in advance. The thing I'm doing now leads me to the next thing organically. The work I do and the reactions I get, that helps me know what I can do next. Right. One thing leads to the next. If I didn't start my own magazine, maybe I wouldn't have done a book. If I didn't blog, 12 times a week, maybe wouldn't have started a magazine. So everything is connected and nothing is forced. That's why everything I talk about and do, it's very natural for me to talk about, because this is who I am, right? There's no faking it. You can't do 45 research studies and hate research. You can't interview over 2,000 people and hate interviewing people. Like it's become very obvious to people that, I was made to do all of this, but it's a longer story with multiple layers, because I was doing all this simultaneously while having that full-time job and then with my own companies. And, I think I gave myself my own MBA by doing all this work and having these experiences and meeting so many people. And if I really reflect back, aside from, over time figuring out that my vision was to help my generation through their whole career path from student to CEO, which is on the top of my website, I also realized that I intentionally focused on content in order to build a strong network. The output of all of this work, including in Back to Human, I interviewed 100 young leaders from 100 of the top companies in the world. Took 3.5 months, 850 communications, a lot of no's, but I locked 100 people in, and 79 recorded in the book. And that journey, it was less about, oh, how do I hit so many, interview so many people? It's more about, answering the question, what if I knew one person at the top companies in the world? That's really what I was trying to do. And I ended up turning it into a community. So now they could benefit from each other. And the book was an excuse to have those conversations and build that community. So that's how I've always thought about it. The blogs, that's why I interview people. It's all about the network. The network is, the most valuable asset you have in your life. And I knew that even in college, career services were like, just throw your resume at people and hope for the best. They didn't say that, but that's how I interpreted it. And then when I graduated,
closer to that than probably you.
Yeah. And then when I graduated, I'm like, okay, this doesn't work. And so I saw blogging and media as a path to networking, because every successful person I found in my whole life has two things in common. Two things that they want is, number one, they want to be more successful. Number two, they want to be recognized for that success. And so knowing that, I played off of that and was able to promote a ton of people. I like it. I like doing it too. It's fun. And I've had the same format forever, 5 questions under 10 minutes, turned it into a podcast, 5 questions with Dan Schawbel, but it's been in written form for many, many years, about 12 years.
So while we're on that, how can people say that again so people can find the podcast if they want to go find it?
5 questions with Dan Schawbel. So it's 5 questions with very successful people like Van Jones, Richard Branson, Condoleezza Rice in under 10 minutes. So the feedback's been, it's the podcast you listen to between meetings because it's so short.
Gotcha. So you've started to answer the question I want to ask next was about, you've written a couple of books about career, and now you've written this book that we could say is a book about leadership. So my question was about why the shift. You've sort of answered that a little bit, but is there anything more you want to say about sort of how this book that we're going to spend some time talking about evolved, or how you ended up here? Any more you want to add to that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. Number one, each book helps people get to the next phase of their career. And it's written when I'm at that phase. So Me 2.0 was college to first job. Promote Yourself was first job to management. And this is a leadership book. And about 40% of people my age have a management title and above. So they time this out at a good moment in time when they're struggling and they feel very isolated. They need some coaching and support. And so I feel like this book is a good book for them, especially because, the younger you are, the more likely you are to depend on technology. So people my age and even younger are addicts. Like overall in our society, people tap their devices over 2,600 times a day. They look at their phone every 12 minutes. It's just, we're constantly using these technologies without even thinking about it. And we think that the technology is going to do the work for us when we need to manage the technology and use it as a bridge to human interaction, not a barrier. And so don't just stay on technology your whole life. Use it in order to go to a social event, go to a meeting, have a video conference, like have those interactions, because that's what actually matters. And early in my career, it was all about electronic communication and connecting, because that's what I'm an introvert. That's what felt natural to me. But it wasn't until I took those relationships offline, especially moving to New York, where I met all of them, where my life became more fulfilling and I have deeper relationships with them. So that's one part. The second part is the pendulum in the first book was all the way to technology, right? It was heavily focused on, Me 2.0 reflected the Web 2.0 movement. Mm-hmm. The second book had 40 pages on soft skills, because the research that I did with American Express found that the most important thing that managers look for when promoting are soft skills over hard skills and social media skills. And then this book has a heavy emphasis on human interactions over technology.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's all the way the other side. And what inspired this book was I was interviewed for a documentary that's coming out next year on Netflix called The Revolution Generation. And for 2.5 hours, I was asked about the biggest challenges of my generation. And so I said income inequality, which is massive, war, climate change, and student loan debt. And then I really focused on isolation. I'm like, wait, what's affecting our daily lives? And the reality is that half of Americans are lonely. 9 million people in the UK haven't spoken to a close friend or relative in the past month. 40,000 people a year die of loneliness in Japan. Like, this is a global issue. And so the study I did with Virgin Pulse of over 2,000 managers and employees in 10 countries reflects that. We're lacking connections, and especially in the workplace. So about 7% of workers have 0 friends at work, and half have 5 or fewer. And so, while we desire this human connection because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need it in order to be self-actualized. Mm-hmm. What we want is different than how we're behaving. We're spending 30% of our personal and professional time on Facebook, and that doesn't include any of the other networks or email or anything else. And here's the kicker. The biggest thing that gets in the way of human interaction in the workplace is email. Yet, one face-to-face conversation is more successful than 34 emails exchanged back and forth.
Oh, and everyone who's
we're driving ourselves crazy.
Like, everyone who's been on an email thread knows, right? And in fact, on my team, if you get to the third comment in an email, like, someone pick up the phone, because our team is largely remote, pick up the phone, get on your webcam, because we're going to solve it with a whole lot less issues, and we're going to have better results.
And by the way, as you know, speed in business is so critical, especially right now when there's so much disruption, where people just expect you to get back to them quickly because of technology, because of texting, and people are trained to want instant gratification. So if you're waiting, 5 days to answer an email, you've lost the client.
Well, yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. You've talked about 3 things, all of which I wanted us to talk about and go into a little more depth. But you mentioned the point about the technology. You can see, if you're watching, you can, and of course Dan can see, that I have a little thing in my Post-it note in my copy book. It says, self-assessment. Do you rely too much on technology to collaborate? And having just written a book about leading at a distance, I thought we'd talk about that just for a second. So talk to me about how we know why. We just talked about the why. How is it that people are relying on technology to collaborate as opposed to non-technology?
I think the psychological, it's just convenience. People are using technology because it's very convenient. Rather than walking 2 feet, I can just, click a mouse and type a few things, and that's it, right? And it just sends. So I think people just want things that are convenient. They want the technology to do the work for them. They don't want to put additional effort in because they feel like the technology is there to solve the problem or to help them collaborate and do that work. And then we have all these technology. We have Slack. We have all of these different collaborative technologies that has made it so easy because they want you to use their platform. So they're purposely getting you addicted to those technologies because they benefit financially. So we are addicted to these technologies. We rely on them too much. And when we do that, there's misunderstanding. Like what you were just saying before about, the confusion of sending emails back and forth. It's because of misunderstanding, because you keep having to clarify yourself. You don't want to come off the wrong way. I remember there was a study about emoji use in emails. You're seen as incompetent if you send an emoji through an email. So there's risk associated with a constant flow of email. But I think technology can be good. The easiest example is, if you're trying to remind one of your employees to hop on the conference call, one text is perfect. You're not going to walk over. Right? You're not going to fly to their house in Phoenix and say, "Oh, can you please pick up the phone?"
Right.
So I think it's where, when, and how you're using it. It's in the way people described it when I interviewed from the book is a double-edged sword, right? It can be good, bad. It's how you use it. That's really fundamentally what I'm trying to get to. I hit technology hard in the book to make bigger points about our addiction.
Right. So the key is, of course, they're all tools. They all have good uses like any other tool. It's figuring out the right tool at the right time. And to our point, email is not good for a conversation. That's the whole point we're making there, I think, right? So you want to say, that you have the phrase, the age of isolation in the title of the book. You do talk about it a lot in the book, as you've already hinted. Talk a little bit more about how that's impacting team members and leaders at work.
Yeah, great question. So the biggest finding in the Virgin Pulse study, the one that to me is just hits home so hard as someone who's worked remote for 8 years, is everyone always talks about the positive side of working from home. You get freedom and flexibility to work when, how, and where you want. It lowers your commuting costs. You don't have to drive. The longer your commute, the more depressed you are. There's research on that. But no one talks about the negative side. No one talks about the loneliness and isolation you get from working from home regularly, the lack of human interaction and how that affects your health. And so a third of workers globally work remote, yet 2/3 are disengaged in their job. Right. And so the big thing we found was that if you work remote, you're much less likely to want a long-term career at your company. So working remote lowers team and organizational commitment. To me, that's a huge deal because so many companies, and I'm not saying I think people should work remote sometimes, right? Not always. And we have to be more conscious about, using video conferencing or having offsites. Only 20% of companies have offsites for their employees. Yet what I found in the research is that that's the number one way to build a more human culture where people are socializing, getting to know each other, and being more productive. I was just talking to a friend who's the CEO of a company with 140 employees, young, my age. And he said that they had a lot of social events and then they stopped doing it and it hurt the culture. And, some employees were working from home and there's a lack of disengagement. There was high turnover. And then he said, okay, I'm going to go back to a more socialized human workplace, do more outings, do some events, conferences, celebrate birthdays. And now his retention's higher. It's a happier place to go. He walks into work and it's just like a family now. And that's actually what people want, especially people my age. They view their manager as their work parent and their coworkers as their work family. And it's much harder to leave a family than a bunch of acquaintances.
Oh, for sure, right? For sure. So you got at some ideas that I think are important for everyone listening to say, okay, there are facts that say there's no doubt that people feel isolated. They feel alone when they're working by themselves, and they may be very productive on their insular work, but they're not collaborating and all those things. So while that is,
and you know what else is interesting?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, to add on to that, which is really fascinating, is even if they're in a physical office space, they can be isolated too. A fascinating research study I just read was that, there was a whole thing about open offices for many years. There was some study that came out, I don't know, like 8 years ago, 10 years ago, that said, hey, open offices makes workers more productive and happy and a company grow faster. And so 70% of all organizations globally became open offices because of that. And guess what? An open office where you see your colleagues actually makes you more isolated, less productive, and have worse human interactions, which is super interesting to me. And you see so many people in the workplace that just have lunch at their cubicles. They're not going to lunch with their colleagues. And the excuse psychologically is, oh, I don't want to miss an email. I got to get this project done. There's all of these excuses. So it's so important for a leader in today's society to encourage the socialization, to take the lead and say, hey, as a team, we're going to lunch. Like, you have to do that. Otherwise, the relationships are going to be weaker. And if someone gets another $5,000 for another company, they're going to leave. Whereas they're not going to leave if they love who they're working with and what they're doing, because work is what you're doing and who you're doing it with. It's a lot less today about, am I working for Google? Am I working for, State Farm Insurance? Like,
doesn't matter.
As long as you love who you're working with and the work you're doing and you feel like it has meaning to you, it's going to be hard to leave. I mean, you'd have to be paid $50,000 to leave. And even then you'd think about it because there's a lot to lose. Or you'd use that $50,000, additional offer as leverage to get more of your current company because you like your current company so much.
Right.
And you're going to talk positively about your leader and your current company on Glassdoor and other sites so that you're going to end up being a recruiter for the company. So people have to get their head around the fact that socialization, human connection, saves money long-term.
And I want to say one thing here, and I think, and hopefully that as people are listening to us, Dan, they're hearing this, and that all of the stuff that you just said about what we want, as those who work, what we want, all of those things can be influenced by the leader. All of those things can be influenced by the boss. And that's, most everyone listening is in that spot. And so I hope that no one leaves, and I'm confident you feel the same way, not to leave despairing, but leaving empowered to say, I got some things I can go do to make this work better for my folks and with my folks, as opposed to the overall global statements of fact that you're describing. Fair?
Fair. And chapter 9, I think, is the most important chapter for any leader. Lead with empathy. Like that was a very tough, intense, thoughtful chapter for me, because it's something that is just being started talked about in conversations globally. We lack empathy, and people want to bring their full selves into the workplace. If they're suffering outside of work, that's coming into the workplace. If they're suffering at work and they don't get along with their colleagues, that's coming into their home, right?
And
because
if they're celebrating at home, they're bringing that in.
Exactly. So it's
well.
understanding the whole person and getting to know people on a personal level, not just a surface level. I think that is how you build the strongest connections, and meeting people where they are. You don't know what people are going through at that time. If their dad died 4 hours ago, or they need a mental health day, we have to take a step back. They're human, they're adults. You got to treat them with respect, because that's how you'd want to be treated anyways as a leader. And I think the best leaders are the ones that are very understanding of people's situations. Not a situation of, someone calling into sick, late, coming to work late or being sick every single day for months. No, but like once in a while, if someone needs a break, give them a break, as long as they're working hard and producing. Like that's what really matters. It's about if they're following through, if they're great to work with, if they show you respect, there has to be a give and take. There always has to be a give and take, because they'll just leave. And then when you have to replace an employee, it's brutal. I mean, from hiring, it is it is a nightmare. Anytime when we need to hire someone, I'm like, good God, I need to go for a run, because it is so stressful hiring people. And then just hoping things will work out. And, it's that 6-month grace period. And so I think it's so important to be a good, strong leader that people need, someone who's empathetic and caring of others, because you're going to have lower turnover, and lower turnover is, great. You can't establish a strong family culture if people are only staying for 2 months.
Well, that is for sure. Although some of us have people in our families that perhaps, not me, perhaps they'd like to see them gone after 2 months. I'm just teasing. So listen, the next section, Dan, of the program we call the Fast Break, and this section is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. And so if you're listening and you haven't gotten a copy, I'm not sure why, but you could go to longdistanceleaderbook.com and learn more and get a sample chapter, etc. So in this section, Dan, I've got 3 words for you. And I'm just going to ask you to sort of give us your initial thoughts, reactions. There's no wrong answers to these words. All right. And for everyone listening, he has no idea what I'm about to say. So the first word is vulnerability.
I think of safe space. I think of creating a safe, I just posted about this morning, creating a safe space for others first, so that they're more open with you. As a leader, you need to do that first. You need to be vulnerable. You need to be honest and outgoing and transparent, because once you do that, then people will lower their guards, and they're more likely to tell you what they're really feeling and what's getting in the way of them producing.
Okay. Second word is learning.
Yeah. Chapter 3, shared learning. Practice shared learning. True power in our society is not from people who hog information. It's with people who share. Social media, podcasting, all of this, the world we're in, that's what we do. I mean, we're sharing this freely, and that's how we're attracting a following. We're building connections. And I think in the workplace, the average relevancy of a learned skill is only 5 years. In order to keep up with the changes of our economy, we have to rely on each other and learn from each other to do that.
All right. And the third word is influence.
Yeah, I think influence is based on trust. People will trust you if you're open and honest and you're constantly looking out for them, not just yourself. But with a caveat, in chapter 1, it's called focus on fulfillment. You need to focus on your own fulfillment first before you're able to help others understand their potential and help them be more fulfilled. So you just gotta have your own vision. You need to know where you're going. You need to have confidence. You need to really understand yourself and what you're good at and how you best lead. And then you can have one-on-one discussions with people you work with to figure out how you can best mesh together to create a more cohesive workplace.
All right. Awesome. So we've been chatting for about 30 minutes and people have got a sense that you're a busy guy. In fact, you and I had this conversation before we actually hit record, which says busy people understand busy people.
Yeah.
But when you're not writing and podcasting and everything else, running a business and doing research, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, comedy shows I love. I'm a big runner. I run 5 miles a day. Traveling, I'm next up is Australia and Singapore and Croatia. Everyone's talking about Croatia and Portugal. So those sound great to me. Yeah, I like Marvel movies. I think most people do. That's why they're so successful. And I actually don't watch TV. So that's one thing I don't do. But I love New York, walking around, cruise ships. I've been going on cruise ships forever, and I used to play tennis since I was 6.
All right. Awesome. And so we're almost done, but a question that I ask everybody is what's something you've read recently that people might find interesting that you might point people in that direction? Obviously your blog, but that's not what I'm asking for right here.
No, I wouldn't even do that. So my friend sent me a really interesting study that came out that said the happiest people choose time over money. And the reason why I think it's really fascinating is because the way I interpret time and money is money buys you time if you let it. I mean, think about Uber and all of these new apps. You're buying time, and so I think if we focus on using the money to free up time to spend it with people we care about, we'll establish really strong human bonds that will truly lead to happiness long term.
All right. And so where can people, the book we've been talking about, Back to Human, How Great Leaders Create Connection in the Age of Isolation, where can people learn more about you and your work and the podcast and everything else? Where do you want to point people?
Yeah, danschawbel.com. That's SCHAWBEL.com. And you can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, your local bookstore. Listen to my podcast, 5 Questions with Dan Schawbel, on iTunes. And then there's a self-assessment for the book, workconnectivityindex.com. So you can learn how strong your work relationships are by taking a short assessment.
Say it again.
Connectivity.
Workconnectivity.com. So
workconnectivityindex.com.
Sorry. Workconnectivityindex.com. I got it right now, and you heard it multiple times, so you'll have a better chance of getting it right now, everybody. And so now a question for all of you listening before we go. As always, the question is, now what? So what are you going to do as a result of what you've heard us talking about and the ideas that you've heard from Dan? Something here, hopefully more than one thing, but something here should be more than just interesting, but should lead you to take action or to make application. And so my challenge to you, is it something related to the time money exchange that we just talked about? Is it something about how you can connect better with others? Is it something about what you could be doing as a leader differently, or even how you use email differently? Whatever it is from our conversation, I challenge you to think about what you can do with what we've chatted about. So Dan, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. So everybody, we're here every week, just like this. If you love this, you'll love next week. And come on back for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.